He grew up in poverty, struggled in school, and experienced hostility based on his race. But then he went on to become one of the world's greatest neurosurgeons. Welcome to Freedom Alive. When Dr. Ben Carson was just 33 years old, he became the director of pediatric neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center and the youngest major division director in the hospital's history. Dr. Carson performed 2 unprecedented surgeries by successfully separating twins joined at the head. In 2008, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President George W. Bush, the highest civilian honor in the country. I'm thankful to again be joined by our co-host Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, as you know, Dr. Carson most recently served as the 17th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. In fact, he even helped Liberty Counsel in a case where seniors were prevented from decorating their homes with Christmas decorations. We're so honored to have Dr. Carson here with us today to share some of his story, as well as how churches and faith-based communities can counteract issues like racism and hatred and be a critical part of the solution in America.
I remember when Dr. Ben Carson was in that position, we did have this issue with these entities, these government entities or government entities that receive funding, I guess, from the federal government, that did not want these individuals to have Christmas decorations in his department under his leadership. Because of Dr. Ben Carson intervened and changed all of that. But his book that he has, Created Equal, talks about a painful past that he experienced. You wouldn't notice that now with the accolades and the achievements that he has done in his lifetime, but he had a painful past. And he now talks about how that past, he now brings it to bear into the present, encouraging people not to be afraid, and also has a very special message with respect to race and the division that we see happening in our country. What a timely message that he's bringing to us right now.
Absolutely. A story of wisdom, inspiration, and we cannot wait to bring it to you. But our Freedom Alert is next.
Doctors receive bonus payments to administer COVID-19 shots. I'm Matt Staver, co-host of Freedom Alive. The Biden administration and health insurers have incentivized doctors and healthcare providers with bonus payments and reimbursements to put COVID shots in the arms of Medicaid patients. The federal government also used taxpayer dollars to reimburse providers for administering the shot to the uninsured at twice and, in some cases, nearly 3 times the usual dollar amount than the traditional vaccines. Documents reveal that the federal health insurance program, Medicare, California's Department of Health Care Services, and Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield Medicaid in Kentucky incentivized health care providers to promote and give the COVID shot. This includes shots particularly to people in lower income and minority communities, and it was paid for with taxpayer dollars. The medical system needs reform.
Up next, Matt's interview with Dr. Ben Carson.
I'm very pleased to welcome our special guest, Dr. Ben Carson. He's well known to all of you, but he's got a brand new book out, and it addresses a critical issue that we face in America, and that is the issue of racism. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Dr. Carson.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And we remember when you were the 17th Secretary of the HUD organization, that you helped us on a situation where some nursing facilities were stopping the residents from celebrating Christmas, and your office, through your direction, intervened, and all of that was resolved. So you have done so much incredible good. But I want to talk about what's behind your book. And your book is an amazing book called Created Equal, and it's about racism. It's also about your background. So can you give the viewers some background about your growing up years, the time when you were young and some of the things that you faced? We all know about your professional life and your incredible achievements with this amazing gift that God has given you in the medical profession. But share a little bit with our viewers about your background when you were young, the
kinds of issues that you faced?
Well, early on growing up, I thought I had an idyllic life. We lived in a little 700 square foot GI home, which is smaller than my master bedroom now, but that was home. And I thought it was wonderful until my parents got divorced. And life changed dramatically at that point. My mother had less than a third grade education. We were homeless for a little while, and then some relatives took us in Boston. Very typical tenement, large multifamily dwelling, boarded up windows and doors, sirens and gangs, a lot of violence. Both of my older cousins who we adored were killed. And I didn't think that I would live to be very old. But I was also a terrible student. And that distressed my mother greatly because she wanted us to have a better life than she had. And she prayed and asked God to give her the wisdom to know what to do. And he gave it to her, at least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was that wise. Because it was to turn off the TV and make us read books. Reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And it was really that had the first big turnaround in my life, because as I started reading about people of accomplishment, scientists and explorers and entrepreneurs, innovators and surgeons, I began to realize, contrary to what I was hearing in my environment, that the person who had the most to do with what happens to you is you. It's nobody else. It's not the environment. And, I really changed my outlook because, it was the Detroit inner city outlook, and it moved to a global outlook. And I started thinking about what I could do rather than what I couldn't do. And in the space of a year and a half, went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. And that was a big change in my life. I also had a terrible temper as a young person. I would just get so angry and I would do ridiculous things. And one day I almost stabbed a classmate with a knife, and fortunately he had on a large metal belt buckle under his clothing, and the knife blade struck it and broke. But that was a life-altering thing for me, because I locked myself in the bathroom and I just started thinking, what was my life going to be? I would never become a doctor with a temper like that. My options were jail, reform school, or the grave, and I didn't like those options.
Wow.
And I just prayed, asked the Lord to somehow help me with the temper. And there was a Bible, and I picked it up and opened to the book of Proverbs, and there are all these verses about anger and fools, and they all seem to be written about me. And, I came to an understanding while I was in that bathroom that the reason I was angry all the time is because I was selfish. It was always about me, my, and I. Somebody did this to me. Somebody took my thing. I want this. And I said, if you just learn how to step outside of the center of the circle and let it be about someone else, it'll be a lot different. And that was the last day I had an angry outburst. My life completely. So that was the early portion of my life.
That's amazing for people to hear that as your background, because people know you as this world-renowned surgeon. You did the first pediatric surgery where you separated conjoined twins at the head, and yet you had this kind of a background. You could have been not Dr. Ben Carson, but you could have been Ben Carson killed long ago. You could have been Ben Carson, part of a gang long ago. You could have been a Ben Carson who hated God, hated America, and was someone who used race as a division. But you're a different Ben Carson. What made the difference in your life? You talked about your mom's direction to turn off the TV, but obviously you had faith in your life as well.
It was my faith that had the biggest impact. God is kind of a character, because he takes a knife that I'm used to trying to kill somebody and turns it into a knife that I use to save people's lives.
Wow.
And
that hold on just a minute there. That's a profound statement. That's a profound statement, that a knife that could have put you in prison, that you could have used to take a person's life. He actually later put a surgical scalpel in your hand and gifted you to save people's lives and to do this incredible surgery where you separate these twins that were joined together at the head.
And I actually think he has a pretty good sense of humor.
Yeah.
You know, from that day that I tried to stab a young man until this day, I start every day and end every day reading from the book of Proverbs. It was written by Solomon. Well, that happens to be my middle name, Solomon. He knew he was going to have that connection. But also, remember when Solomon became the king of Israel? The first thing that made him famous, 2 women came to him claiming to be the mother of the same baby. He advocated, divide the baby. Well, that's when I became very well known, when I divided babies.
Wow. That is profound. In your book, you talk about the painful past, a confusing present, and the hope for the future with regards to race in America. You also mention in your book, and I want you to talk about this, that there's a difference between systemic racism and systemic sinfulness that manifests itself as hatred, racism, unfairness, selfishness, and other evils. A sinful society, you continue, will always demonstrate the things of which it is composed, but not one of those things defines it. Talk about that for us.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of what we ascribe to racism, and that was really the reason that I wrote the book, because it seems like suddenly everything reverts back to race after we were making such incredible progress. Just, you know, in my lifetime, you look at how dramatically our country has changed. I remember as a youngster, 6 years old, going to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where my parents were from, and seeing the whites only and coloreds only signs at the bathrooms and the drinking fountains. I remember as a kid when a black person came on television in a non-servile role, it was a big deal. You called everybody into the living room, hey, come and see this. And now in the same lifetime, we have black admirals and generals and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, heads of foundations, university presidents, including Ivy Leagues. We've had a president of the United States. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. For a society to change that dramatically in one lifetime, that says a lot of good about that society. And, you know, we ought to try to build our future based on our progress, not based on the mistakes that we've made in the past.
That is an incredible shift from where we were back in the 60s and 70s to where we are now. But now it seems as though there's this effort to divide us again and use race as a divisive tool, as opposed to bringing races and ethnicities together.
That's correct. And, you know, it's not just race. It's age, it's income, it's political affiliation, it's gender, everything. Because if you want to fundamentally change a society, first you have to create discontent with the system that exists already. And that's why you see so much of what's going on. You know, open borders, lack of prosecution of criminal activity. All these things are creating chaos in our system. And you need that before people get fed up and say, okay, we need to move to something different.
Now, you have, through your past, obviously, as a young boy and then growing up, going to medical school, have you experienced this kind of personal racism, and how have you dealt with it?
Yes, I clearly did. Certainly, I tell the story about when I was in the 8th grade, things had turned dramatically for me. Academically, I was at the top of the class. And, you know, there was a certificate given, a special ceremony for the highest academic achievement. And I was sure that was going to be me, and I was the only black kid in the class. And my band teacher tried to ruin it by giving me a C in band. I had A's and everything else. But to his chagrin, it turned out band didn't count, so I got the reward anyway. And at the ceremony, one of the teachers got up and chastised all the white kids because obviously they weren't trying hard enough if the black kid was number one. And all the kids, were kind of looking at me and rolling their eyes and giving the crazy sign and pointing to her because they had known me since I was in the 5th grade, and they knew me when I was the dumbest kid in the class. They saw the transformation and they respected that, but it was a little different for some of the adults, and they just, had to learn. And then, people have preconceived notions. When I was in medical school, I did poorly on the first set of comprehensive exams, and so poorly, in fact, that I had to go see my counselor. Said, "You seem like a very intelligent young man. I bet there's a lot of things you could do outside of medicine." He tried to encourage me to drop out of medical school. He said, "You're not cut out for medicine." I was devastated. The only thing I wanted to do was be a doctor since I was 8 years old. And, now I'm being told by the person supposed to help me to drop out. And I just went to my apartment and I said, "Lord, you got to help me figure this out." And I started thinking, what kind of courses do you always struggle in? And those were courses in which I listened to a lot of boring lectures. I don't get anything out of boring lectures. I did well in classes where I did a lot of reading, so I just made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that.
So for all those kids out there that are struggling, they just need to drop out of those boring lectures and just focus on the books. And, a lot of it does really come back to the teacher. It's not necessarily the students. It's the way the teachers necessarily teach and the way perhaps other people perceive or learn differently from one or the other way.
That's the key. Learn how you learn. And when I went back to my medical school some years later as the commencement speaker, I was looking for that counselor because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be a counselor. But, some people are just so negative. And actually at my medical school, they now have a type of curriculum that allows people to learn in different ways. Come to recognize that it's very different for a lot of different people.
Now, you have a story in your book about courage as well, exercising courage, and you have been courageous and very straightforward on your Judeo-Christian values and your beliefs and your moral underpinnings. You haven't wavered on that. But your one story, I think, sort of illustrates some of that courage that you've done in your life. And it's a story about where I think you were young in your practice at the time. You were in a resident situation where you were not supposed to do surgery without the supervising doctor on site at the time. But you had someone who came in that had a brain or head injury and needed immediate attention. You had to make a decision right away. Do you help this man's life or do you wait and possibly this man dies? And you made the decision on the spot there that you were going to do surgery even though the other doctor was not there, and it ended up saving this man's life. Tell us about that, and how does courage ultimately play a role in your life, and how can it play a role in the lives of the people that are watching?
Well, the reason that it was a precarious situation is because it was a time of a national neurosurgical meeting. So all the attendings were away in another city, except the one that was left behind to deal with emergencies. And a young man came into the emergency room, severely beaten with a baseball bat, unconscious, brain swelling, CAT scan demonstrated hemorrhagic contusions. He was going to die. And I called for the attending. No one could find him. Nurses couldn't find him. Paging operator couldn't find him. And so I was left with this decision. Do I risk my career after all this hard work doing something that's illegal, taking this person to the operating room to do a dangerous operation, which I had never done before? Or should I just put him in the ICU, intubate him, put him on steroids, and let nature take its course? And I prayed. And after I prayed for wisdom, I was completely calm. I knew what I had to do. I took him to the operating room. Everything came back to me because I'd seen the operation done before. And it worked out beautifully. That young man is now a child psychologist helping other people. I never got into any trouble. In fact, I was praised for doing the right thing.
Wow.
But so often we don't have courage to do the right thing. We don't have courage to stand up for what we know is right. And that's where our faith comes in. You know, God has never led me astray, and he never will.
You talk in your book about the word stranger in the Old Testament, that when it refers to stranger, it may not be, it refers to somebody who's not in that same Jewish ethnicity, if you will. But it always also talks about how you do not discriminate against them. You treat them equally. You bring them in. Talk about that in your book.
Well, you know, I talked about the Good Samaritan. And the fact, you know, you'd have to know, but back in those days, there was an enormous amount of animosity between the Samaritans and the Jews, worse than just about anything that we know of today. And this individual was aided by a stranger after having been severely beaten. And not only a stranger, but a stranger of another ethnicity. And it really points out the fact that with God, we're all the same. Jesus died for everybody, and he loves everybody. And he's actually a good guy because he gave us variety. Can you imagine what the world would be like? Like you? I mean, think about it.
Yeah, that's right. So true. You're one of the, in fact, Dr. Alveda King is the person who wrote the foreword, and she often has said, we are one race, part of the human race. God made us different in different ways, but we are all part of the human race. And race is a beautiful, you know, the different kinds of colors of our skin or the ethnicities that we have is a beautiful creation of God, and we should celebrate that rather than use that to divide. And Brian Kill made mentions on the back of your book. I've never read a book that better tells the story of race in America than Ben Carson's Created Equal. So I encourage people to go to your website, AmericanCornerstone.org, AmericanCornerstone.org. And I assume they can get the book there at your website, AmericanCornerstone.org.
And that's our think tank / do tank that emphasizes the cornerstone principles that made us into a great nation, namely our faith, liberty, community, and life. And then we also have a pediatric component called Little Patriots, littlepatriotslearning.com, where we have free online lessons about who we are as a nation, what our history is, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the fact of the matter is a heck of a lot more good than there is bad and ugly.
Absolutely. And that's a Little Patriots curriculum. Is that for kindergarten through 5th grade, or what's the age range?
K through 5.
K through 5.
Beautiful animations and lesson plans. And we encourage parents and grandparents to do the lessons along with their kids because they'll learn a lot too.
So they can get the Little Patriots curriculum at AmericanCornerstone.org as well as the book Created Equal?
You can get it there as well. Absolutely.
So 2 questions in the time that we have. Somebody faces racism. How should they respond? How do they deal with it? And then the second question after that is, what can the church do with regards to this issue of racism that we see happening in America?
Recognize that a lot of times when people do things, they do them out of ignorance or out of fear. And, why not try to alleviate those things in their lives rather than play into them and react in a negative way? I think that's so important. That's what Christians should do.
Very good wisdom. And what about the church? The church is a great opportunity to be able to bring people together. It is the hospital, if you will, of our soul.
Well, I think the key thing for the church is not to compromise. We have a lot of churches today who are trying to become woke, trying to do the things that society is doing and somehow make it okay. It's not okay. It's okay to love everybody, but it's not okay to accept every activity, everything that's done. And the church really needs to stand out in that regard.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ben Carson. An incredible time with you. I encourage people to get your book, Created Equal by Dr. Ben Carson. And you can get that at AmericanCornerstone.org, AmericanCornerstone.org, along with the Little Patriots curriculum and a lot more.
Or Amazon or wherever books are sold.
Absolutely. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for standing up for the Lord and for your voice so clear in this book and in all that you've done. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you for being a patriot.
Matt, what a remarkable story of transformation and wisdom. I really had two thoughts. One was how blessed we were as a country to have Ben Carson in a leadership role in a key spot, right? And the second was his point about God's sense of humor.
Yeah.
And the parallels, right? The story about the knife.
A story about where he took a knife to try to stab someone, and but for the belt buckle, he would have stabbed that person. And he took that experience that he had to rethink where he was going in life to eventually train him to be able to carry a surgeon's scalpel that did this incredible surgery that saves lives. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And, you know, somebody like that could have taken his circumstances where he grew up with a divorce situation. He was in an inner city. He heard the gangs and the sirens and all the other things in that inner city where he grew up. And he could have used that to become a bitter person. But instead, his mom correctly said, you know, shut off the TV, start reading your books. That's why you're not doing well in school. And he began to assess where his life was going. And through faith and through his mother's guidance and other circumstances, he transformed that policy that he was involved in of the, you know, depleted neighborhoods, the direction he was going, to being one of the most world-renowned surgeons ever.
Absolutely. What an important message at such a time in our country as well, for the need for healing and reconciliation and just understanding. We are delighted to be able to bring you episodes like this, and we just feel blessed to be able to have Dr. Ben Carson here with us today. It was just amazing. In closing, remember John 13, verse 34, which says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time, where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.